platforms through which audiences experience all the great content that we're seeing today. So as we begin to dip a few collective toes into the deep waters of the immersive storytelling experiences, this year, in our Emmys Award contest, which is just underway these last couple weeks, about a third, or maybe a little over a third, of roughly 100 entries in the interactive media Emmy categories took to the Emmy high seas, featuring or including some form of VR, AR, MR, XR. And this is a sea change from just 3 years ago when we saw about a handful of entries with these new technologies. So I'll park the nautical puns on the side for the moment. Here are a couple slides, if you'd like to take a peek over here, illustrating the very rapid acceleration.
Can we have the lights dim over?
Yeah, can we dim a little bit? Rapid acceleration just within interactive media Emmys over the past 3 to 4 years. So you can see that in 2015, which was our first Emmy for something that could be called VR, we had a Sleepy Hollow, and we had, I think that year, maybe 3 experiences that could be called VR or related. And we also had the Taylor Swift Amex Unstage experience, which was sort of a multi-nodal 360 experience. And then we went to 2016 with Henry. And between 2014 and 2016, we had something like 25 total entries across that time period that actually had anything like VR in it. When we went to 2017, we had something like 40. And we had 3 winners that had VR or something like VR as part of their presentation. We had the People's House inside the White House, and we had Pearl from Google Spotlight Stories, and we had Westworld VR, all 3 winners last year. And then this just kind of gives you an illustration of the growth, and it's continuing to accelerate, and we expect that we'll continue to see that. So, as the industry continues to evolve almost daily to incorporate these exciting new technologies and the creative possibilities they enable, creating experiences far beyond traditional television, the IMPG is committed to continuing to support, connect, and celebrate the work of people like you, creating these new forms. So if you're interested in joining the IMPG or hearing more about it, please see our membership representatives, or myself, or Lori afterwards. Would you guys, you raised your hands up? All right, everybody saw them. Or you can go to members.televisionacademy.com for information, and you can join right online. So tonight's panel is sure to challenge your assumptions and open your minds to some new ideas in this arena. And I'm personally very excited to hear what I know will be a spirited and inspiring conversation led by and moderated by my awesome and learned co-governor, Lori. So to start off, we've got Tanner Stransky in the house. Let's hear for Tanner. Director of Digital Content at HBO. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the impressive and provocative work that they've done with shows like Westworld and Silicon Valley. And we have with us tonight also another Television Academy governor, Tammy Glover Park, VP of Production at TNT, TBS. And Tammy's shows include The Last OG, Search Party, Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, one of my personal favorites, among others. And with her chops in production and experience, she will school y'all on how to get these sexy new forms of entertainment and storytelling really get done. And we find out about that. So next we have Jacob Robinson, Director of Original Programming for TBS. Among his apparently many other duties, Jacob is the creative head of TXR, a Turner studio focused on the development of extended reality content. Ooh, extended reality. Nice buzz phrase. I can't wait to hear what that's about. And finally, we have Rick Hack, who handles media and entertainment partnerships for Intel Americas. And now I'm quoting from Rick's bio. As part of his role, Rick establishes symbiotic solutions for TV, film, labels, and artists by using technology, media, content, and platform extensions. Symbiotic solutions. Well, that's deep now.
Thank you.
Immersive, you might say. So who's ready to pull back the digital curtain and dive in? I know I'm ready. So let me hand it over to Lori H. Schwartz, your spiritual guide and arbiter of irony for this evening.
I don't have to wear the thing, right? Okay.
No, you don't have to wear
Hi, everybody. So the exciting thing about today's session is that VR and AR and MR have moved really past the 101, the how-tos of what that is. And what we're really wanting to do today is get into how is this really moving through studios and networks and large media companies? And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how great networks and studios like Turner, like HBO, and media companies like Intel, or data companies, are moving through this. So we're going to get into some real information about what they're doing. And then I'd love to take questions at any time, so to make this really interactive, okay? So we'll have some fun. Yeah? Woo! Okay, now listen, you got to hit the bar kind of constantly because it goes away soon. So none of us are going to be hurt if you hit it hard over there, because we're all for lubrication. Okay. All right. So we're gonna start right away. And forgive me for using my phone, but I left the paper in the car because I am a digital girl. So we're going to start with Tanner, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about. You're leading development of marketing content, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that you've done a lot of marketing content that's really interesting, and we have a little clip, and you tell me when you want to show it. But how much thinking goes into, is this going to be VR, AR, immersive? Give us sort of a spectrum of how HBO is moving through this.
I mean, I think we are exploring the technologies. So the thing we're going to look at here in a minute is the VR experience that we built for Silicon Valley. And just to give an example, we'll explore the space and then try to marry the right show to it. So same with augmented reality, we've gone there a little bit, but we have not fully taken a splash. If you want to go into voice and chatbots, we use the same sort of way of thinking about that. It's like, where could we apply this? Then we go to programming and our showrunners and figure out like, how can we like marry the right story to it? This one worked really well. So do we want to show this absolutely. Maybe? I think it gives a good sense of some of the stuff we've been doing.
Hello, this is God. I regret making you. Oh, thank God, you're home. Okay, good. Oh, you're not gonna believe this. Don't go in the garage. Hurry the fuck up.
Tables are made so a person can sit down.
So if you couldn't tell, it's a fully interactive room scale experience with the main set piece of Silicon Valley. I mean, it's not a linear story, it's sort of interactive story. So there's 750 different things you can do in that space. There's a couple of different pathways that can take you through. I think you saw the sort of to-do list, and you can see that the guys, we got them involved too, the characters from the show, they can sort of like pull you through on a little journey as well. So,
and can you talk a little bit about, because this was fascinating to me, about how you work with the showrunners of the show, and so how that sort of integrates together? Because I know for a long time it was so separate
Yeah.
any sort of content, digital content that was coming out of a network. So can you share that with us?
Yeah, I think like we at HBO are built where sort of in showrunner kingdoms. So everything we do has to be fully partnered with them, and what happens is that we tend to not go too crazy season one. They're usually still building out their worlds, establishing their canon. But as we sort of build trust with them, we tend to have a transmedia producer that is on the production side, and we work directly with them. For this one in particular, there had been enough trust that we sort of were able to say, like, we've got a couple of ideas, and they do the same thing with us. So it's about just sort of like we don't really make any moves I mean, Mike Judge looked at this at several steps along the way. Yeah.
That's so cool that you're hanging out with Mike Judge.
Yeah.
Well, and one of are you guys all familiar with what an FYC is? An FYC event is? Okay, a few of you. So it means for your consideration, and if you're a TV Academy member, you get to go to all these great events around this time of the year where all the studios and networks are showcasing their Emmy-nominated content, and that's because they want you to see it, so you'll vote on it as an Emmy member. And Silicon Valley's FYC was like the hot ticket this year.
Yeah, and we actually took the VR there as well.
Right. So here's my question for you on VR. Not many of us own a Vive or an Oculus, and I know the more affordable portable headsets are now coming out, but is distribution something you think about when you create something?
I mean, we definitely do, but luckily on the marketing side, I was talking about this with you a little bit earlier, Lori, but like we're focused on headlines and sort of good buzz and a good association. So we felt like we had to go up to the high-end headsets and sort of forego distribution because we wouldn't be able to sort of do what we wanted to do in the sort of low and mid-tier. And of course, there's sort of assets that are created that go down to those, but like the mothership experience is on the high-end thing. And yeah, it's a huge trouble. I always feel like it's like, can we talk this out? Can we figure this out right here? I don't know that we're gonna figure out the distribution.
Right, but you actively chose not to do it on, say, Google Cardboard or some of the lower end systems.
I mean, we feel like those are, again, in the promotional, that we feel like this, it's confusing. I sit in marketing, but this is actually a true, real piece of content, and we see that kind of stuff as more like the promotional pipe to the big content.
Right, so that's great. So Tanner's a real example of content and marketing sort of merging and pulling at each other inside of a network. So let's jump over to Tammy, and Tammy's VP of production at TNT and TBS, and that you are really seeing every production go through. So how are you guys looking at immersive content?
Well, it was interesting to hear Tanner talk because you're coming at it from a technology perspective, and we come at things from a story perspective.
Yeah, and these guys both work at Turner, but they have different roles, so it's going to be interesting to hear their perspective.
I basically execute the things that Jacob envisions. So, he's creative on the show side, and I'm a producer with a deep, long background making television. So I deal with unions, schedules, calendars, sort of the AD production manager world. And before we hire those people, at TBS, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but basically our networks, TNT and TBS, were rebranded about 3.5 years ago. And so Jacob and I were part of the team that came in when we were building a studio, which Kevin Riley, that was his goal, and to have original programming at TBS and TNT, we came in to execute that programming. Jacob decides what goes on the air, and then I execute whatever that is. And what I was getting at, before we hire people, I do a schedule, I hire crews, I chase tax credits. So we're shooting all over the world, and our episodic orders in TV are somewhere between 7 and 10 episodes on the scripted side. We have Sam B, we have Conan. Those are a little bit of a different production model, but our anything that we do in a digital space, AR, VR, which are really the only two things we're exploring right now, come from a story place. And unlike the studio business, where I'm basically hiring and putting a crew together, what we're doing on the VR and AR side is that we're looking for partners, because I'm not individually hiring those crew members, which is what I do on the studio side. So we're looking for a team of people, typically, whatever their resume items are that sync up with the creative vision for what we're trying to accomplish in this space. And we're really driven by story. And like I already have two takeaways from what you said. One is story kingdoms, showrunner kingdoms, which I haven't heard that. That's great. Because we're doing that. We rely on our show creators and showrunners. If they have an interest in this, we're going to involve them very early on. We have a particular property, Final Space. I don't know if you guys watch that show, but it's an
Anyone
animated
aware
show.
of Final Space?
It's an animated show that was created by Olin Rogers, and the content, the world of that show lends itself to AR and VR, and so it was a very organic process for Jacob to envision what that world would be in VR and AR.
And when we had talked, you had said that when you bring in something like a VR, AR project, you're obviously looking for people that have experience in that area, but moving it through your world, how do you do that if you guys have never done that before?
Every show is a startup. Every world, when I'm not a police officer, but we make a satire of a police show in Angie Tribeca. I'm not a hipster millennial living in Brooklyn, but we make Search Party. That's the fun of being in production, is learning new things and figuring it out. And so we start at the very ground level, whether it's with agencies or marketing people and what their experience is, and we just try to find in this particular instance, we try to find the people who have won Emmys for interactive media, and we call them up and say, can you explain to us what you did, and then we cherry pick the best parts of that process and the best people to help us make our project.
And you had mentioned to me also that that immersive content follows a lot of your animation models. Can you explain that to us?
Well, I think what I meant by that is the workflow is, because I also oversee animation.
So you're not busy, is what you're saying?
Well, I delegate everything so that I can be on panels like this. No, I just meant that the workflow, for a scripted show, and I'm just talking about like Search Party, Angie Tribeca, The Detour, things like that, which have a model. You start a writer's room, and they might be in it for 14, 16, 20 weeks, and then you start principal photography. In animation and in VR and AR, you really have to have the entire thing mapped out. So you have to, before you even start animators, on a second cycle show, you can be a little bit more liberal with that because you know the direction, but the workflow is closer to animation because you're working out the entire project, and then you're sort of flipping a switch and checking in along the way to make sure that you're headed in the right creative direction. So it's it's just a little bit different. And then in an unscripted world, you're doing all of that, but you don't have that writing thing in the beginning, and the whole show, the most creative part of the show in an unscripted world is post. So, and that's not really the case in any of, it's very interesting and it's still creative, but I would say of all the things I've worked on, the AR, VR workflow is most similar to animation. I see real parallels there. The other thing that's sort of interesting is where these things fall as independent standalone projects versus marketing, because there's a whole other part of this business where you could just rely on smaller promotional content to drive people to your show, and like in the experience of Final Space, we're not doing that. It's a standalone immersive experience.
That's so interesting. And Jacob, can you tell us, because what I thought was so interesting when we talked was even just how your role came about, and you're sort of thinking about, we have to have a strategy for immersive.
Sure. So as Tammy said, I joined TBS about 2 years ago and had a passion for VR and AR. and we weren't doing anything in the space, and went to my boss's boss's boss and said, I think this is an imperative. But what I really noticed was that no one at the time was telling compelling serialized narratives in the space. Almost everything, even when it was expertly done, was being driven by marketing as sort of one-off. And for the technology to thrive, there needed to be a sustainability, a repeat viewership. And I looked at TBS and TNT and the strong storytelling and the strong creator relationships that we had, and saw a right to win there. And so I said, what if we created a studio to do both series adjacent content, things like Final Space, that would, for example, we'll do 5 or 6 episodes of Final Space as a first season of VR, and then do a second and a third that may intersect the linear, but it could also be fully standalone. But then also do completely standalone content. And unlike coming out of the marketing department, we actually do have to figure out the business behind it. Unfortunately, I have a lot of runway with that, which is nice. There's not an expectation that we're in the black immediately, but that we are building business models around each of them. So for Final Space, we might have a little bit more leeway because there is a marketing component inherently built into it because we have a linear show. But we're working on a project called The Expedition, which is about a failed hot air balloon Arctic expedition in the 1880s that starts off as a disaster comedy and ends up in this, like The Revenant. And we're going to do a 10-part podcast series and then a 5 or 6-part VR series companion piece. And we go, okay, so what's the business behind that? Is it LBE? Is this interactive? Is this 360 video? And start working down to the technology, but the story comes first. And that was Angela Petrella, who did Dear Angelica. She wrote it.
And Dear Angelica was an Emmy Award-winning VR project.
Came to us, and this was her passion, and we said, great, like that's an unbelievable story, and we want to figure this out with you. So we really do start story first, and then try and figure out everything afterwards.
And then I think you were also telling me that not every, like somebody will come to you and say, let's do a VR project, and you have to do that analysis of why. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I think it's the most important thing, and especially in the early days, there was a novelty to it of like, oh great, like let's do this in VR, and maybe we can get additional funds from here because it's VR. And it runs the risk of, I think, 3D on the motion picture side of like, do you burn people out with bad experiences? Mm-hmm. And as soon as, it is such a high barrier for you to say, okay, I'm going to put this thing on. Like, I work in VR, and it's probably been a month and a half, actually longer because I have a 5-week-old at home right now.
So it's amazing that you're like sitting up.
So let's call it 3 months since I've thrown on a Vive or a Rift, just because it is a high barrier. And so when you win it, you want really compelling content. And if you experience something in there that's like, why did I watch something with lower fidelity that was distracting, that would have been much stronger had it just been two-dimensional up on a screen, like you feel cheated. When you experience something like a Dear Angelica or like a great experience, I can't wait to do Silicon Valley, that's really engaging, you go, oh man, I get this. I want to live in this space. I want what comes next, whether it's one-off or whether it's serialized. So yeah, the first question you should ask is, why VR? Why AR? Why? And as Tammy alluded to, with Final Space, it's one of the only projects where it was like the biggest no-brainer ever. It's animation, which is future-proof from a fidelity standpoint. The assets are portable. But most importantly, the story lends itself. The world building is innate because it's a space opera. The tone of it is something that rarely exists in film or television, let alone in the VR landscape. So it was immediately clear why this made for a great story and why we thought we could get people to come back over and over again.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the Expedition originally pitched as just a linear, it was just a, it was a pitch based on a book.
And so since we were doing all of this work and exploring VR, it was another one that just organically, as soon as we started talking about it, I think the most compelling thing we had seen up up to that point had been Google Earth, you know, and experiencing that. And to me, that elevated everything as a consumer. I felt like, okay, I would actually, because I'm not a gamer and I have a very limited amount of time, and I love television, so I watch a lot of it, and it needed to be compelling. Like, I'm sort of that baseline person where like, if you can get me, then you know that I'm sort of middle
You're
of the bell
canary in
curve.
the coal mine.
Completely. And when I heard about Expedition, because it combined, like, I immediately thought, like, oh, that would be so cool. You're exploring in a hot air balloon. I can completely see this as an immersive experience.
Right, so it has to make sense.
Yeah.
So let's jump over to Rick. So Rick is at Intel. You have a really cool job.
Thanks. I was hired because my last name. At least that's what somebody told me over there.
So tell us about what your role is, you know, for Intel, and then Intel sort of, we all think of Intel as a chip company, but I know you're going to give us unique perspective on where Intel is headed.
Yeah, so we've been repositioning the company over the past probably year and a half as more of a data company now. So we were a CPU company, CPU-focused company for quite a long time, and if you look at the revenues of where CPUs are going and where PCs are going, we started seeing that business started to flatline a little bit. I mean, you still had revenue growth last year, but you look at now, what once was 70–80% of our revenues is now, you know, around 50%. And so we shifted into this data focus where we're doing everything from supporting infrastructure, collecting data, processing it, transmitting it. So when you look at how we look at the ecosystems, we see it as like a virtual cycle. So we are the baseline, the infrastructure, the inside of it, and you have all these 50–80 billion connected devices that are going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So how are those devices going to be connected? How is it going to be supported? And so that's where we see that, explain that side of it. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more into, obviously, why we're here on the immersive side. And what I see my role a lot of times with folks that approach me and they say, well, you know, what do you do? Where do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself in this process? And I said, well, a lot of times, if I use an analogy of a movie, if you look at James Bond and you look at the character Q, well, I guess, you know, we're kind of like, we have all these really cool tools, right? We don't necessarily always know what they do, but we put them in the hands of guys like this. And we say, wow, what could you possibly do with it? So one of those tools...
I could use the Aston Martin, so...
So one of those tools that we recently launched is in Manhattan Beach. You might have heard about it. It's the volumetric capture or the Intel Studios. And it's...
Can you explain also what volumetric capture is for folks?
Oh, sure. It's anybody familiar with this process of inside out? And so we had 2 business units. We grew this business out of our sports business, and we acquired 2 companies. One was a stereoscopic company called Vogue, which allows you to see things as you would see through the natural eye. And the other company, which was now True VR. And the other company is called True View, and it was born out of a company from Israel called Replay Sports. So we stood up this business unit because we saw $500 billion in the sports business, and we wanted to see how we can get a piece of it, because I think you guys face this issue, the immediacy and the of content. How do you make it relevant? How do you get an audience, right? With sports, it's like you have to see it. You want to see it in real time, or your friend has already posted about it on social media. So wanting to have a stake in that business. And so we placed, to get it started with the replay technology and True View technology, we use cameras inside of sports venues. So we use 38 cameras on average inside of sports venues to capture a moment, an amazing moment. And if you've watched the Super Bowl, if you watched the NBA Finals, they stop on a single play and then they rotate on an axis, and you can see how that player did that amazing slam dunk or score that incredible goal in La Liga and all these different sports teams and leagues that we work with. Well, that data itself is volumetric. So eventually, and what we're working on, or what we're working towards, and what we've been doing, is getting that into a headset. So where you actually have room scale. You're able to walk around, and ultimately outside of sports, where we see this extremely powerful way of telling stories, and in a way that you can actually be a part of that narrative, you can be a part of that story. So hopefully that describes a little bit about volumetric, capture.
So do people come to you and say, "Hey, Intel, give me something"?
So they do a lot. How do I work with you? How do I become that amazing storyteller? How do I work within your space? So we were always looking for that, and you brought up some really good points. It's like, how do I find, what is the content that makes sense for that type of experience? And you look at the marketplace, and we are not only looking at it from the immersive way of telling stories, but even filmmakers are seeing the way they can shoot a scene in a visceral way, where it's not just the Matrix moment, but really you have like a virtual camera within that space. And you can look within, you can have any single angle, and you're shooting that scene one time, so you have to make sure your scene is choreographed. But looking into that scene and seeing how it could be ultimately, could it be a 2D delivery? Could it be something as a volumetric immersive experience? Could it be AR? Could it be mixed reality? So hopefully that, did I answer that?
Yeah, I think you did.
I keep going up on a tangent here.
No, you did. And I'm going to come back to you with some of the projects you're doing. I just want to take a moment to ask the audience if there was any questions at this point. Does anybody have anything they want to ask anybody? Okay. So I wanted to ask maybe the whole panel, and Mark jump into, because Mark has been on the board for Interactive for the last 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah, so this is my 5th year as governor. I've been on the executive committee or governor for 10 years now.
Right, and very involved in awards. So as he showed you, he's been watching this evolve. So I just want to include you in this conversation. But one of the areas that seems to be monetizing in immersive is location-based experiences. So I was just wondering if you guys can talk about it, because we actually had this discussion when we were looking at awards the other week, when we were looking at the submissions. If someone submitted a location-based experience for a television Emmy, is it television? And what's going to happen when all that content does start to bubble up? Will you guys be playing with it? And any of you jump in?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Is interactive VR television? I mean, I don't know where you draw the line. I would say, yeah, absolutely, we'd love to play in it. I mean, I think that it's certainly, from Turner's perspective, I think it has to make sense, right? We don't own a theme park, but if we could take Final Space and create an experience,
Yeah.
There's been lots and lots of talk. It's just like I don't think we've cracked exactly what it is, but yeah, I mean, I would say everybody's like thinking about it, gonna go there in some way, if it makes sense. Like,
I mean, there's a reason why, I think Fox was probably at the forefront of all the studios in thinking about this, because it's the first entity to put their immersive outside of the marketing department in home video with an eye towards LBE from Go, saying both how do we do this as EST, but then how do we also, why are we licensing Avatar to Disneyland? Like, why can't we go create that experience ourselves?
So, and Mark, in terms of awards that came in, were there LBEs that came up this year?
Yeah, well, we had experiences. I think there's 2 flavors of LBEs that we're seeing. One are things that are specifically designed for a particular space, may require additional things like a haptic vest or things like that, which would be very hard to recreate in any other setting. Others are ones or require multiple players or experiencers. There are others that I could imagine could be, we were talking earlier about, the scaling up and down of the experience from the sort of top end to something that's maybe more accessible to a home viewer. So we're seeing experiences that could be in that second category, but that happen to be deployed in a location for, exposure reasons, for marketing reasons, for the idea of, well, we're gonna sort of draw a line in the sand here, put a stake down for like, well, we think that this is as legitimate as entertainment and as something called maybe television as a lot of other stuff. And certainly the question of what is television and what is the Television Academy all about, I mean, that's like every week we have that debate and have had.
It's a drinking game.
It's a drinking game. So, and our peer groups, intent and role and our, perspective of the people that tend to be in the leadership is we want to push that envelope as much as possible.
Right.
And we get pushback. We get pushback from traditional TV production direction and folks in the Academy who feel like, well, wait a minute, no, we're getting very far away from what we think of as television. I mean, we had a conversation just this week about, is it a game, right? I mean, what makes a game? So these definitions, and to my thinking, it's like galaxies, colliding in space.
Yeah.
There's huge overlap. There's huge elements that belong in both places.
But isn't it, I mean, and this is happening just because you used to only be able to do it in this. Like,
Right.
this is why this is happening. I mean, like, what is television story now? It's going all over the place. And that's why it's like, I mean, when you said we come at it from a technology perspective, we certainly come at it from a technology perspective and a story perspective, but we're looking at like where is possible, and then that's where we're trying to go and say, what could we do in that possible place? So I just sort of mean like, what did they expect? In some ways.
Like I said, we try to take as broad a view of something called television as we can. I mean, there's been active debates too between sort of what is film, like cinematic, theatrical film, versus television, and there's been much debate about that in traditional film festivals who have rejected television properties in theory that are kind of like
it's fuzzy.
film. So there's a lot of this going on right now, and I think our job, all of us here, is to continue to challenge that and to put it out there. And I think, Jacob, you were the one talking a lot about anchoring in story and the experience of a viewer. I think that's what we tend to come back to. So it's not, ooh, whiz bang, bright shiny object technology piece, nor is it, because we can do it in VR, we should do it in VR. That kind of, there has to be kind of a more organic justification for it to lead us through.
And Rick, I just want to throw back to you. So speaking of things all coming together, there was a press release a couple of months ago, which I immediately called you about, which is about Warner Brothers partnering with you on connected cars and VR in connected cars. So can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe you guys can also jump in about how all the IoT, VR, AR, AI are all kind of colliding and what you guys are looking at. So Rick, start us off.
Yeah, so for a couple years, we've been looking at the automotive safety side of it, and we actually made a huge acquisition last year, $15 billion with a B dollars in a company called Mobileye out of Israel. And for quite some time, we've been focusing, again, all about the safety. I know everybody wonders, like, when is this autonomous vehicle really going to get here? Really, is it going to be autonomous? So the studios have been coming to me and saying, well, what about, and one of the ones that really stuck in my ear is Warner Brothers saying, what's the experience going to look like once safety is sort of a non-issue and consumers are comfortable with the car and being in a car, whether it's your own vehicle or whether it's a shared ride. What does that experience look like? Is it going to be that the entire cabin? What is all the windows that you have? Will they be translucent windows? Is it AR experiences? Then they started talking about VR experiences, but the latency and, like, obviously you don't want to get somebody sick while they're driving in a car. So how do you get interrupted when a call comes in or something happens within the car that you need to be notified? So we partnered at the end of last year, and we made an announcement at the Automobility Conference with Warner Brothers, and we're sticking our toe in the water with them with a proof of concept that we're going to deliver at the end of this year. We're dedicating a fleet vehicle. We have a bunch of fleet vehicles that are dedicated to a lot of things, and we're dedicating one or two to entertainment. And they are going to be going, because they're storytellers as much as you guys are, and they're going to help envision with us what that's going to look like. And we're hopefully going to be sitting back and being more, what I wanted to say earlier, is being this frictionless just layer that just works. And what are the things that you guys are envisioning? So we're hidden in the background. It's something that's non-intrusive, and it's all about, how that amazing experience comes to life, and that's what we hope to enable at the end of this year.
You guys, are you jumping into any of these other technologies?
Oh, I've had the same conversation about, if you think about self-driving cars, how are you spending your time? What's that technology? Already you have 4G built into every modern car. What happens when that's 5G? Do you have AR? Do you have VR? podcasts are making the most of people's commute time right now. Why wouldn't that be?
Yeah, why wouldn't it be a video experience, right?
Or in the case of, let's start simple, why wouldn't it be linear television?
Oh, anything, yeah.
And then I'll say this, like one of the impetuses for my jump into this was thinking about where we are 5 years from now, where television is 5 years from now. And if you believe in the proliferation of wearable AR, for example, and a semi-reasonable price point, you know, are you going to spend $500 to get a 50-inch TV that you're going to put up on your wall, or are you going to spend $500 on a set of glasses where you could have a 200-inch TV there and another 50-inch there, and be moving these things around and watch 10 NBA games all at one time? And if that's the case, from a linear television perspective, we need to be thinking not only what is that experience, but then do you really want to be creating that 2D experience within, or do you want to be doing volumetric capture for sports? Do you want to be telling indigenous stories in that space? And I think for us, the answer is a combination of both. We're not going to pivot overnight, but we do need to start figuring out how to tell stories looking 5 years down the line.
And, you know, not to get too far away from marketing modules either, we do explore more ambitious things in that space. Like, I don't know if anybody here goes to Comic-Con, but we had a really interesting immersive experience at Comic-Con with a show called People of Earth, which is it's a linear show, and you know, it's shot very traditionally. It's Greg Daniels. There really isn't too much more traditional television programming out there than this show, but there's a component of the show where the people all believe that they've been abducted, and so at Comic-Con we created a very full body immersive experience. It wasn't just a headset, it was also air, and it was just a really cool, like you put on goggles, you were guided in, your whole body felt it, and then of course those people become ambassadors for not just that experience, but also the television show and Turner and TBS and all of it. So we'll go wherever there is a compelling story, experience. We're creating fans at our network, and that is ultimately, you know, however we can create a fan is where we're going to be with our productions.
And you should talk about what you guys did with Westworld and South by, because that was a mind blow.
Yeah, I mean, this was another group in the marketing group that did, I don't know if anybody heard about it, but we basically just rebuilt Sweetwater in Austin. It was about 20 minutes outside. We bussed everybody out. There was a ghost town. We worked with an agency to do it. It was a really ambitious thing. I mean, that's an example of, again, like, you know, we had explored virtual reality and a chatbot and a website, sort of world extensions, world building for this show in season 1. And as we were ramping, the virtual reality experience was fully set in, like, you know, the Delos employees come and take you and the whole thing. And I think, you know, we did a couple of other at both Comic-Cons, New York and San Diego, and then they were looking at South by, you know, in advance of season 2, and it was a thing of following the story. We were like, people love these immersive. There wasn't a ton of digital, honestly, besides the virtual reality experience, but we were like, this makes sense for this show. And I don't think this was
so cool.
It was so awesome.
It was so amazing
because
it also used a lot of really old school mystery and almost like, you know, when we would call digital new media, it was like very lockbox, you know, quizzes.
Yeah, Easter eggs, cryptology,
exactly,
little like panels you can pull down that like pull back a door. And it was,
and
you know,
the selection process too, for like how you got to participate.
Yeah, that was a little bit of the digital
really
part.
Exclusive.
Yeah. And they, it was a 444-page script that looped every 90 minutes at the town. Yeah, it was like one of the coolest things we've ever done.
I mean, it was the buzz.
It was like Sleep No More, though.
It was. That's
right?
actually, and that's another. It's an
and
example.
can you explain what Sleep No More is to everybody?
If you've been in New York and there's a theatrical experience where you could go with your friend or your partner or your significant other, and you walk in the door and literally you're thinking you're going to a show together and you are separated and you have you as a consumer have a vastly different experience than the person that you came with. Everybody has their own individual experience. And so when you go through what you did at Westworld, everybody went through almost a different maze, and then if you found some of those Easter eggs, then you were shepherded into a different area of the park or whatever you want to call
I'll tell you,
the town.
when we were talking about it, the creative was being concepted with Jonah Nolan, the creator of the show. Sleep No More was talked about a ton, and he's way more interested in those flyaway, tiny sort of experiences. Like, he wants to have the person at Sleep No More that's stuck on the 4th floor over in the corner. That's what delights him, and that's what we really focus on. I mean, of course, there's the main, sort of stake of it all, but the other stuff around it is I guess where it gets weird and fun and creepy, and that's where you get the most excitement, the most sort of social. This is where I start putting on my marketing, that's where you get the fans. Yeah.
It's where it gets specific, and it's also what drives repeatability, right back to that point, which is Sleep No More. They say that at most you're able to capture, it's Macbeth, but they say that you're able to capture at most 7% of the story on one visit. And so with 444 pages, it's the same thing. So when you're talking about a one-off, well, that's a way to come back again.
And that, by the way, is immersive, and you don't need any goggles, right? HMDs.
We actually were talking to, we were trying to figure out our Emmy submission for Westworld, and we talked a lot about how do we include that, because it's so cool, but it's not an interactive. It's experiential to have home. It's a different thing, but it was definitely the coolest thing we did.
One of the things that I think we've seen over the last few years in terms of, in particular VR, but other things in digital and interactive, is what I would call sort of a move toward holisticness, or whatever the
360.
In the sense that a lot of stuff in previous years has been little break-off pieces off to the side, and what you guys are all talking about to a great degree is whether it's labeled as marketing or kind of serves a marketing fan support.
Could you guys talk about that more, because that's a great point, because I know specifically you and I had a long conversation about it. It's kind of fascinating. You're marketing, but you're creating content, and you made the point with me that you're not creating original content.
It's original content within the world that has been established by the showrunners. So it is derivative in its way, but it's often an original story within that universe. It's kind of like the Fargo model. They made the movie, and now here's this other TV show that's in that.
Right,
what I'm saying? If you want to look at it like that.
But you're still in the marketing department, but yet you're creating content.
We are charged at HBO. There's a group that's in sort of digital products interactive that comes at all of this from a tech perspective. We often partner with them, but nobody, besides these two groups are the ones that are doing this kind of stuff. So it's our programming department is really very still focused on the screen, and then the rest of the groups are the ones that work on
And what about you guys? How close do you all work with marketing?
I mean, it was an interesting conversation early on, and we had to kind of draw that delineation. So we work with marketing closely, but it now is mostly marketing coming to us saying, hey, we have this idea, can you advise us? Or us coming to them and saying, hey, we have this series that we need you to help market. So Final Space, for example, marketing will put a portion of the linear show's budget towards the VR series to market that, understanding that if we are able to capture audiences in a very highly engaged way through this product, that they're more likely to view the linear show.
This is how we look at it too. It's our budgets are often, from a media perspective, are saved for interactive or immersive experiences, with the idea that you capture those super fans and those highly engaged fans, and they will be your warriors, your battle. They'll your ambassadors, cry for everybody, and they'll bring more people in. Yeah.
But we also have our own budget within to market originals, because again, taking the Expedition for example, unless that ends up finding wild success as a podcast and VR series, there isn't a linear play there. So we need to figure out how to put that out.
How to get it out there. And Rick, is a lot of what you're doing, do you work with marketing as well to make the public aware of what you're doing?
Well, externally, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter who we work with. Content is content for us. So it's the ideas and how does it push the industry forward. We're here to rise all boats. But yes, our marketing division it has certain initiatives that they want to set forth, and whether it's at VR LA and the vision of our strategic marketing VR person wants to have location-based experiences like Birdly. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Birdly, but those guys support our ecosystem by using high-end processors, and the content that they develop, it's almost what we like to talk about as an end-to-end story. So how the content's developed on Intel, and then how content is then delivered onto Intel or experienced on Intel. So Birdly is sort of a mechanical machine with even a fan in front of you where you're lying down. You might have seen this, and you are literally flying virtually through different areas and different
Yeah, I
towns.
actually through Central Park.
Yeah.
And you get really sick. Only because you're actually flying. I mean, I felt like I was flying.
So it's important to tell that story. Marketing, and if you're talking from an internal perspective, it's important to tell our education story. So we did virtual classrooms at VR LA recently. I'm just talking about the most recent things that we had done. And there's an interesting platform called Sansar, and I'm not sure if you've heard of it. But when a lot of folks talk about VR as an isolating type of technology, and Sansar really brings it together by having something more social where you actually are talking to your friends. You're an avatar in this virtual world.
It's like Second Life.
World building
if you guys are
environment.
familiar.
Second Life?
Yeah.
Perfect. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And you are literally meeting those individuals' friends while I'm here and Phil is in Paris. We could meet in a virtual environment off by the pyramids and look at go through a museum together and talk about it. And I'm dressed as Harry Potter, and he's dressed as Trojan Warrior. So whatever.
That was very revealing, Rick. Now, does anybody have any questions before we keep going? Anybody back there? Yes. Yes, Phil, the Trojan Warrior.
You said that production of the area is very similar to animation. I'm just curious, have you done any sort of parallel production where there's shared resources, or do you always just set up video production as a vertical standard?
I would love to do that. There would be efficiencies if we could. But other than assets that we poured over from animation, everyone is just simply too busy. So they don't have the bandwidth to work on both, so that we keep them very separate. And the one thing that I would say that hasn't come up that is sort of interesting in this world is that the television production industry is quite it's old. There are efficiencies, and there's a history of like how we do things. There's mentorship, there's unions and guilds, and so like the barrier to entry there is huge. And I just feel like it's fun to play in this space because everything is being invented in real time, and there's a sense of excitement
and broken.
Yeah, exactly.
We're breaking the rules, right?
You're right about. I mean, TV has such a sort of like. There's just like the way it's done.
Yeah.
We do. It's just sort of 'cause it's been done for decades in certain ways. So it is interesting. It's like we've been figuring out new things with every different production we do.
And in animation, I would say that animation lives somewhere in between those two worlds because it's not quite as old as TV, but there's still systems when we actually get into the art and we're checking and we're building storyboards. I work at a certain pace, and so I'm always surprised when I go in and I'm visiting the studio and I'm talking to artists. It does occur to me like, wow, we're still doing it that way. Like that has got to be paced up. There must be a better way to do this. And in VR, AR, any kind of new technology, I feel like, oh, okay, these are my people, and we're figuring this out at a different. Every time I'm on a television set and we do a process trailer with a car, I'm just like, oh my god, I can't believe we're doing this. Like it's so dumb. There's better ways, but you have a UPM that has his vendors that he's worked with for 25 years, and he's the guy in charge, and he booked that vendor, and you kind of have to be a new person on set to go, hold up, you literally, like the original version of SWAT Like in 1977, you were shooting your process trailer like that, and we need to have a quick offline so that I can talk to you about what is happening in 2019, because that's where I live, you know. It's really interesting.
Tammy, you know, I was going to ask a question earlier about the barriers to, on the creative side, and you spoke to that, Jacob, in convincing the showrunners and other people who are involved with that to do a VR or other new technology project.
They're very open to it now.
But now it sounds almost like the production side is perhaps more of a barrier in some of these things than
because they're in a groove. Yeah, they're in a groove, and they have a certain way of doing things, and also, you know, in television we never finish anything. We abandon it. You know, we run out of time, and it's got to get on the air. So no one's precious about the process. We know that there's a pace, and it has to fit into a model that is economical and hits a deadline. In this technology, it's newer and fresher, and we're figuring it out.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you a question about the deadlines, actually, because we, you know, with efficiencies and the things that we are looking to create and accelerate, and the proof points that we hope to deliver and provide back to you. Sometimes those deadlines just seem to get pushed and pushed. How do you deal with those types of barriers, especially when you have to deliver a show and it has to be...
Production is a triangle with tension between creative, business affairs, and production.
Oh, I love that.
Pick two things. Okay, so you can have... What's that? What?
Stealing that.
Well, yeah.
Better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah, better,
and
faster,
she made it
cheaper.
an equilateral, by the way, when she did it.
You pick two of them. You can have a great product. It's gonna, and if you need it quickly, it's gonna cost a lot. And you can have a very quick project that's on budget, but it'll probably suck. Mm-hmm. So you know, the reason that things get pushed out is that you want them to be really great. And if you don't have a deadline, we could spend, I mean, we would, all of our shows would win Emmys if we didn't have to hit an air date, because we would make them great. But we have to, you know, there is a crew available, or there is an air date that we have to hit. There's something happening where we are backing into. The beauty of AR and VR is that a lot of times, like if it's a completely standalone project,
doesn't have a deadline.
Doesn't have a deadline,
Right.
and we can make
Right,
it really
and
great.
Tanner,
but
yeah, I'm sorry,
the limit is budget, because obviously it can't go on forever. At a certain point, you have to have a deadline, because you'll go over and you don't have the money. You're like, where's that coming from?
I just want to say very quickly two things. One is we do have great shows that should win Emmys.
Yeah.
And
for those of you that are Emmy voters, keep your eyes open. Good question.
TNT.
Just before I take those two questions, just Tanner, just because we were talking earlier and you made a good point about kind of how long things take. So could you share that?
Well, I think it kind of connects to, Tammy, what you were talking about with like, there's a ton of upfront sort of like treatmenting, I would say, that has to be done. Like that Silicon Valley experience, I mean, you might spend 10 or 15 minutes in there, which would be great. We would love that. It took us well over a year to do it. Like they're really long timelines for like one piece of content. I mean, partly because we're all kind of learning and figuring it out along the way. And the other thing that happens to your point about the sort of linear deadline you have to hit, there often isn't. I mean, oftentimes we want to hit, premiere, but then it's like things push, then push. They can keep pushing because there's I don't have to fill the spot. It hasn't been like logged by our scheduling department or whatever, like it's like we'll push the launch back, which is good and bad, I guess, both ends of it.
Right, if you can't hit air date, then maybe you're going to hit Comic-Con. If you can't hit Comic-Con, maybe we're,
then it goes, it's between 2 and 3, oh great,
And then your birthday.
Yeah.
Joanna, did you have a question? Oh, you were agreeing? Oh, you have a question. Yes, sir.
Can you see, especially with technology advancing, that you can start having episodic, immersive experiences to the point where you could actually do may have 10, 15 shows where you can actually do your upfront,
in VR or something.
VR. And to that, and then furthering the gentleman from the TV Academy, when that takes place,
let me jump on that one for a second. Absolutely, and it is today. So that's not a shift for our peer group in terms of the Interactive Media Awards. What is interesting, though, is when, if ever, does a show like that happens to be a VR show that's episodic, when does that stop being an Interactive Media Emmy, and when is it just dramatic series that happens to be in VR?
Yeah, it's like when our children grow up, they leave interactive and they go to the other categories.
But it's kind of like how it's worked for the Academy the entire time. It's like, remember they used to have the Cable Ace Awards? It was like they weren't Academy prime time yet, then now they all went in. Then now streaming is all like, they are there.
Unscripted
you know?
and scripted.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm just sort of like, it's an inevitable
yeah.
kind of march, probably. You guys are doing episodic, though. I mean, right? You're working, you're actively developing right now.
doing it.
That's the bulk of what we're doing. I mean, I'll pick a project, but we have one we're developing called Rebound that's essentially like Hoop Dreams, where it's 8 episodes in the first season, starting with someone in the minor league and they're about to be pulled up and then something happens and home life drama, and that's the first season. And we have a second season lined up and third season if we're
That's all
successful
360 video.
And that'll be 360 video. But again, we have interactive projects that we're working on. We don't currently have an LBE, but would love to. Would love to talk to you about volumetric capture because got some ideas there. But
I would say too, like from my experience, I mean, we were in touch with all the tech partners, Google and Facebook and everything. They all are like dying for episodic, like virtual. I mean, like
It's a
we
huge priority.
and we look at it and we're like, do you understand like the amount we will have to pour into that? I mean, like again, talking about this one thing we were able to accomplish, it's really, really hard. So.
You guys accomplished that one thing, was it based on the technology that was at the time you were creating it?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit today too. It's really hard to look into the crystal ball and sort of see like, when we get done with this eventually, like is it then going to just almost be instantly like not outdated, but probably like the headsets will moved on, the technology will be elsewhere, the graphics will be better, but the only thing you have going for you is that everybody else is dealing with those exact same timelines. So
100%.
Something new comes out and then everybody else is just working toward it as quickly as they can. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What was the ballpark budget of the Western piece?
The
Budgets are the biggest, coming from the development side, or
I mean, they're never going to let me tell a budget. I mean, I'm just sorry.
I know, I was like,
Thank you for asking that question.
It was worth every penny, though, I can say that.
not to save you money, there's a lot of people that could be more interested in this.
Right.
How do we get access to that? There's, if you have the creative and the funds, there's a lot of people doing really great development work on the production technology side.
Yeah.
Instead of access to what you have. How do we come together?
I mean, I would say, we are willing to take like a capabilities presentation from anyone that has great work that they can show. I mean, we are always looking to talk to people that are doing the like top of the market stuff.
we'll give you Tanner's
Definitely.
cell number.
I mean, yeah, we are. We are. We field it all the time at stuff like this. Yeah.
That's great. Any more questions? Yes.
Just a question for Tanner about Westworld. Well, I guess generally for the panel as well. Is there some sort of content? Westworld's a fairly lurid show. Is there some content when you guys are creating these experiences? And we've had this conversation about, horror, and there was that VRLA, like, horror in VR is pretty intense.
Yeah.
Is there some shows, some content where you guys are having to make some hard decisions on that? And if not, when can we look forward to the adaptation of the TV show The Deuce?
I mean, we are, if it's an open platform that people can access, we have to like, we're not quite at that HBO zone anymore, which is like, it's always been behind a wall. So we talk about this all the time. I mean, Westworld was hard because a big part of that first VR experience, which another group at HBO did, you're going through the lab where the whole point is there's just like bodies strewn around everywhere. Nudity is kind of a part of it. So you kind of like start using tricks, honestly. There's ways to sort of not let people get too close, you know what I mean? Sort of like we have this great thing in Westworld where it's an aesthetic that we were able to put into everything. There's like the glitch. It's like everything's glitching in Westworld. So if you get too close to something you're not supposed to see, there's a glitch that's involved. Because marketing's available. We're that's not our job. I can't speak for programming? I mean, how do you guys think about that?
It's very subjective.
Yeah.
It's something that we talk about all the time, but our programming isn't as edgy as yours.
Yeah,
so,
right.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, we try and keep things that would feel loosely like they fit under the TBS or TNT banner, and so there's a sort of natural line there. And we have a project we're developing with Crypt TV, and that's probably the thing that gets the closest to your point about like what's the line in horror when you can't look away. But I think that's the only time we've really had that conversation is like what's too much, like how do you lean into suspense without it being, while it's still being an enjoyable experience.
We've done this. It's funny. We draw a fine line between with games. So Arizona Sunshine, if you're familiar with that game, we picked 2 games last year that were the ones that we're going to shepherd in our next generation CPU for our PC division. And we seem to draw a fine line between shoot 'em up zombie games, which is Arizona Sunshine, and then actual horror cinematic, what we call cinematic VR, cinematic story, immersive storytelling. So I think we would produce something. I don't know if Intel would put their name on it, but I think we would, if there's something out there that we see as an interesting business model where we could see, and that's where I was going with this as far as a startup, where we got started with the studio, is that we are looking at revenue models. So we will contribute to that production model if we see a light at the end of the tunnel, or we're setting precedent, or we're creating something that really hasn't been substantially done before.
That's great. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, yes, please, yes.
We have discussing a lot about the interactive, immersive, and all these layers, like exploring a world in 360 video versus AR versus VR. Is that interactive or not? Or branching narrative, or character interaction, social video, or user-generated content that these days is just social. Question is, what should we use to define immersive digital experience, or should you just ditch the interactive thing and start calling ourselves, instead of the interactive peer group, the immersive peer group?
That's a great question.
You want to take it?
No, we talk about it. Don't ask Mark.
That's really
Don't ask Mark. We'll be here all night. No, just kidding.
I would hesitate to answer this because this is a debate that we've had internally. So I would like to, maybe you guys have some thoughts on this. But I do think that there's a bit of a distinction between immersive, as we're talking about, which is, at a deeper level than things that are simply interactive. And I don't want to minimize that, but it's just a different idea.
Yeah.
You may well look at, some kind of a different name for the peer group because of that, though.
It's hard to exactly say what the definition is, but we've done a lot of things that are interactive, that require fans to, sort of ARG style, break codes and dig and come with us and do all that kind of stuff. But I would say almost everything that is immersive is also interactive, but then there are things that are only interactive. Does that make sense? That's sort of where my first reaction is. What about you guys?
My instinct, again, I was talking a little bit earlier about pace and evolution, and I think all of this is evolving constantly. So I think it's a great change. And in the same way that we moved from, back in the days when new media sort of became digital, and now it's, I think that is a very healthy evolution that you want to embrace and as quickly as possible.
What she said.
Yeah, it's the evolution, because I think VR, what we defined as VR 3 years or 4 years ago, is not what it is now. So what we defined it as before was a 360 video, probably, majority of us, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just unfortunately, it's putting labels on things to identify the difference between one thing and the other. But if you want to put everything in the same category, I would call it immersive. I would say immersive or interactive immersive.
The only thing I would say about immersive is that then you open to my point about the South by Southwest Westworld thing, then you open yourself up to that, because
experiential.
Yeah, I think you do open yourself up to experiential, which is a different segment that I feel like a lot of people actually think is not represented in the academy.
Yeah, and by the way, we talk a lot about that. All right, so I want you guys to be thinking for our lightning round. Where do you see things?
I did not know there was going to be a lightning round.
Well, I'm going to give you a moment because I have to do little PSA. But I would love to hear from you where you see the next year to 5 years. You know, just think about that for a minute. So first, I just wanted to thank Spence Bovee, who is our events chair. And again, our membership crew who's here, Adriana and Terrence, wherever you guys are. So again, if you're interested in the peer group or in the academy as a whole, whatever your trade is, please come and talk to them. We do a lot of events. We want to stir up great conversations like this where you hear things you've never heard before. And do you guys have you? Oh, thank you. Did you have enough time for our lightning round? Yeah?
Yeah, I can jump in,
All right,
actually.
and let me just see, is there any other questions before we go to lightning round? Okay, all right, let's do it.
Okay, I thought it was going to be hard, but it isn't hard for me to answer this question because I think there is going to be more standalone content, which is what everyone would agree with, and we've been talking about that already. But the unexpected part of it is that I think we will get more innovative and probably more famous content creators embracing this.
So people that are already well known as filmmakers diving into this. Okay. Okay.
Well, I think the one thing from our side that nobody's really talked about tonight actually is a new level of infrastructure that's coming in the next year, and some of it's already here, is 5G. Yeah. So I think 5G is going to enable a lot of experiences in the next year that you haven't seen before. And I was talking to somebody about when 4G came along and how all the apps that were created as a result of that, but nobody predicted that would happen. So what is actually going to be enabled as a result of the 5G technology? And then I would say 5 years from now, then I really think you're going to start seeing fully room scale, using immersive again, but experiences where you are really the consumer is really part of the story. And part of the narrative that's being portrayed by these guys over here.
I would say 5G is going to be the greatest technological advancement. Looking forward 5 years in the potential, someone broke it down to me very simply. They said this is the evolution of computing, VR is at least. The visor is your new monitor, and this is your new mouse and keyboard. And when you think about that, the possibilities are sort of limitless. And I do think that for VR to survive, I think for AR is less of a challenge, but we need proliferation beyond entertainment. There need to be enterprise implications, and then I actually think that entertainment will come back around when there is a greater adoption rate, because then the business models will be easier.
So distribution won't be this pain point that it is right now.
Right.
Well, and this is something that I would just add for a year or 5 years that we haven't talked about on this panel, but I think does go under interactive and immersive. And I think it will crash into a lot of these other things, is like voice. We've been thinking about that space a ton, and it's like, you know, the numbers are crazy. Like in 2 years, like half of the searches are going to be on voice and all this stuff in the world. And so like if you envision the car you've talked about that's like got the panels on the windows, but you're talking to it. I mean, you see Amazon, all of their new devices have screens. You're not going to be like, you know, we've been a lot of lean back, and all of this is like lean in, and it's not even like lean in and look, it's like lean in, look, and talk, I think. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna be going like this, to your point about being the center. That's gonna happen with everything. It's just sort of, it's this weird thing where it's being like developed here, and then it's like, I don't know how it's all gonna come crashing together.
Do you guys want to also just tell us what to look out for from your different studios and networks? Anything to keep our eyes open for? I mean, we all are watching HBO all the time, so.
Well, for us, it's Final Space.
Okay.
You know, we have an app that's AR, and you can interact with it. But we're going to have a VR product shortly.
That will launch at Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm. Comic-Con, Rick, anything to keep our eyes open for?
So I think from an AI, also from a personalization standpoint, I think there's going to be software partners, ecosystem partners as we call them, that are going to be creating things to simulate humans, simulate characters. That's going to advance a lot of what's happening in the production and VFX space.
And anything from Intel that we should look out for?
We just announced it today, actually, at our DevCon up in San Francisco, a partnership that we're going to be doing with the release of Meg, which is coming out from Warner Brothers, which is pretty interesting. Big shark megalodon movie.
A shark movie. Shark movies are very popular. Mark Johnson, anything that we should be looking out for?
Well, I'll just, I think, Tanner, you kind of said a little bit what I was going to say, which is just continued collision and intersection and, just a blurring of lines between these formerly sort of siloed areas in the experience, in the interfaces. 5G is huge. I mean, a lot of the stuff, I was at DirecTV/AT&T looking at a lot of this, what's going to happen, and AT&T's in the forefront of doing the 5G stuff. It's like the technology is going to enable content, not just entertainment, but content, things that we haven't envisioned yet, and then that's going to come back around and help to elevate the technology. So you're starting to get this virtuous cycle again with technology and content, and just, companies are looking for content to be their way into the consumer's mind. So that's what's going to happen.
I think we're all going to get taller. I don't know why, but anyway. I wanted to thank our panelists for coming out tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Such a great, different perspective. And then again, if you're interested in membership at the Television Academy, you can go to the website. You can talk to our folks here. If you're a member, voting season is coming up, so please activate your membership and vote. And thanks to Victor Harwood for letting us do this tonight. I'm Lori H. Schwartz, your governor, and Mark Johnson, your governor-et. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So different, right? Just the good information. Yeah.
Okay. I'll wait for
Hi.